Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our program. I'm Roberto Miranda for Pray TV and the Covenant for New England. And today we have something that I think is going to be very, very interesting for all of us. Certainly for me, I'm excited about having three very accomplished people who have been working in the area of the arts and who are also believers who are committed to their faith and doing also wonderful things in terms of work in the church and in missions. And I'd like to introduce to you today first Christopher Greco, who has been associate pastor at the Cambridge Vineyard Church for 15 years, and has been working as associate pastor for the arts and healing and worship, and is now working as theater director and manager of a wonderful facility that the Lexington Christian Academy has just developed. And we're excited about what you're going to be doing there, Christopher. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And we also have Marya Lowry, who is a professor at the acting faculty at Brandeis University, and has been, again, also doing extraordinary work in acting and training actors and doing acting and voice work herself. And Sara Belk, who works with Park Street Christian Academy and doing work there as well, training teachers and leading plays and doing all kinds of wonderful artistic things. So welcome all of you, and thank you for being here today. Looking forward to a great conversation. And I was speaking to our producer, Brad Gillespie, the other day, and thinking what a great opportunity to have a discussion on Christianity and the arts. It's something that often we don't get a chance to really look at closely. And that's why we are here, to carry on this conversation. And one of the questions that I have in my mind is, right now when I look at America and I see the conflictive nature of the relationship between the church and Hollywood, for example. And I think it's also true for most of the arts, where Christianity is often seen as provincial and conservative and Pharisaic in its values and so on, and critiqued and criticized in the most sometimes pitiless sorts of ways in the movies and Broadway and so on. And at the same time, we Christians, we give back the favor by seeing the arts with great suspicion and being resentful and feeling ourselves sort of throwing stones from the outside and looking enviously at times at the arts. And so do you see that as an inevitable thing here in America, or can the church do something to change that? Is it our fault? Is it the fault of the secular culture? Is there some inherent contradiction between these two areas? Any thoughts on that?
It seems to me that it's the makings of good drama, because it's all conflict and bloody and different people wanting different things and doing what it is within their power to get what they want. So I think it's humanity. There are reasons. I think there's history, and I think right now the situation in culture is very different than it was like 30 years ago when I was first saying I wanted to be an artist and I was a person of faith, and what was that like? I think that the struggles there's specific markers for today, but it seems to me that this is what it means to be human, and this is what it means to have power or to not have power. Mm-hmm. And so then how do we negotiate with whatever power we feel we lack, or whatever influence we seek to want? And I think that's when the conflict seems to me to get really interesting, is when the church wants the power that the culture has, or when the culture is wanting to shut the church down because of its historic lack of stewardship of that power.
And how can the church get out there and start producing works that are respectable and that are worthy of consumption by the general public? And how can we do that?
I think the church has to not want the artist to preach. I think to produce art, it's a creative process that you're very much going into something you don't know. You don't know where it's going to take you. It's sort of a dialogue. And I think that if the artist has a lot of restrictions on him or herself, it's difficult to go into that process, because you want to come up with the right answer. And I don't think that art necessarily has right answers. And so I think that when the church wants to maybe use the artist to produce propaganda in some ways, I don't think great art can be produced But I think that if the church would engage with artists and participate with them in the creative process and trust them and pray for them and even commission them, I think that might be the beginning of a relationship. But there's a lot of fear.
Well, what happens when artists produce works that, Christian artists even, that may seem to contradict the Christian faith? Even though that artist may be very much, in line with it, but as you're saying, when you get into a creative process, you don't know where the character, for example, is going to lead you, or the plot of the work that you're working on. And, you may want to end up in a place of affirmation, but rather you end up in a place of suspense and seeming, contradiction of the Christian faith. What should be the attitude of us pastors, for example, and leaders? In that case, are we saying, hey, let's allow...
I think to keep dialoguing. Piss Christ, the crucifix that's been submerged in pee. And I think, though, that there's a wonderful poem by a man called Andrew Hudgens. Have you read this? Are you familiar with this?
No.
About
Please.
that, where he just talks about, he sees it in a new light and says that it is quite a beautiful image when you see it, and it's horrible when you suddenly realize what it is. And he talks about in his poem that maybe this is a really wonderful thing because the crucifixion was horrible, and there was a lot of blood and urine, but yet out of that came this beauty and light, which when you see this particular piece and you have the light shining through this very cheap plastic crucifix with this kind of yellowish red color swirling around it, it's actually quite beautiful. And I think that some Christians and the church is maybe too quick to be offended, and to not realize that actually our faith is quite offensive, and to be more just gentle and wait and be patient with the artist. And
now, is that because of our place of insecurity? We feel insecure. Christians in our modern culture, we feel attacked and insecure, and therefore we tend to act defensively.
Yeah.
I guess when you're presented from that point of view, it makes great sense, but often we don't allow ourselves perhaps the space and the time to look at that.
Well, and what it makes me think of when you use that as an example is, as you've said, the world that we live in and drama is full of ambiguity and contradiction, and we carry all those things in us. We are all full of contradictions. And I think the church is afraid sometimes to let that be seen. Is the church trying to present a picture of itself, and by itself I mean those of us who consider ourselves the body of Christ? Are we trying to present a picture of ourselves as already being perfect? But one of the things about your example there is, I do think that fear is underneath that. And I've been a Christian all my life. I've been in the theater since I was in my early 20s, and I have always felt that contradiction. I sometimes feel like I have one foot on one side of the Grand Canyon and another foot on the other. I have one foot in the world, and I have one foot in the church, and often I feel like I don't know how to get the two together. I recently saw a beautiful example of this, I think, is I saw Fiona Shaw in the Testament of Mary on Broadway a couple of weeks ago. And I was very excited to see it. It was a one-woman show based on the story of Mary. Mary is telling her story about 30 years later after the crucifixion. And as a Christian, as an artist, it was extraordinary. Her artistry, the writing was brilliant. The setting, everything about it was really extraordinary. And hearing the story was both so sad to me as a Christian, because she was really negating the truth of the gospel. And yet I heard the gospel, and I heard the story of the resurrection in a different way than I have ever heard it before, because of that conflict in my own soul. I felt like a traitor. I thought, I'm sitting here loving this, but she's saying Jesus really isn't who he said he was. And one more thing on that, in relation to the Piss Christ, is that when Mary told the story of the crucifixion, it had more power. I have read so many things. We have been taught so much about the horrors of that experience on the human body. But when the mother, a woman playing the mother of Jesus, no matter what she thought about Jesus and who he was hanging out with at the time, her telling that story just ripped my heart open. And it's that contradiction again. So would the church allow that story to be told in the church? I don't know. But I do think in the church we have to be brave enough about our faith and what we believe to say, if you don't come 100% in line with our doctrines, that doesn't mean we still can't learn from your grappling with them.